Good afternoon and welcome to today's Illuminated Conversation. I'm Dr. Emily Hedberg with the Lumen Group, and we're so excited that you're here. As you're joining in today or catching the recording, feel free to drop into the chat where you're joining in from. And as we engage in the conversation today, we really want to open that chat up for additional questions, observations you might have so that we can make this more interactive and engaging during our time together today. But this conversation is something that we're really excited to have as we continue to talk about this idea of fostering workplace climate and how we can do that through times of change. And we all experience change. That's probably the only constant in our life, but how we can maintain that as team leaders or as team members. And as we've been really diving into this idea of stress and workplace stressors, and how that can really have a negative impact on our workplace climate when we're not careful. We want to be really mindful of how we're showing up and engaging so that we can really promote an environment that leads to levels of engagement, satisfaction, and productivity. So at the Lumen Group, we are a firm focused on team and leadership development. And as you can see on the slide here, are really on a mission to work together and co-create more human-centered workplaces. We do this through individual and group coaching, on and off-site workshops and retreats, and through our cohort-based leadership academies, supporting leaders at all levels of organizations. And while we say human-centered, what we mean by that is really our approach rooted in biology, neuroscience, and psychology to really inform what we do and how we engage with our clients. But let me introduce you to the rest of the team that's here today. So with me is founder and president of the Lumen Group, Dr. Megan Broger, Donnie Hobbs, senior consultant. And then we also have our administrative and operations manager, Danielle Simmons, who helps to make and produce these sessions. So as I mentioned, our approach is a bit different, really rooted in biology, neuroscience, and psychology. And what you see here on the screen is our centered leadership model. So we believe that in order to be effective team members, leaders of organizations, we really have to come from a centered place. That being grounded, regulated from a nervous system standpoint, enhancing our ability to effectively engage, communicate, and ultimately foster that workplace climate or a positive workplace climate, one that helps promote that sense of engagement and productivity. And not just productivity from the standpoint of getting things done, but helping to also contribute to that sense of engagement and that people are flourishing in the work that they're doing. Mm-hmm. So centering is really about understanding our own nervous system and our own range. So although we're all built biologically with a nervous system, how that shows up for each one of us is different. So we engage or teach skills around developing just that awareness of when I'm grounded, on center, able to really engage and be resourced, allowing me to leverage the knowledge, skills, and abilities that I might have. But it's also important from that same standpoint to understand what pulls us out of range or off center. Perhaps that's driving into traffic, change that's occurring in our organizations. Maybe that change not being responded to in the way that we had envisioned, or maybe crashing an entire Excel document that's really important before a big presentation. There's all these things that we encounter in the workplace that can throw us off center, but it's important not only for us to understand that and how to regulate or come back to center, but it's important because it impacts everyone around us. We know that stress can be very contagious when we're off center. People feel and see that from us in a way that can be really detrimental. And I think will be really relevant to today's conversation as we talk through this idea of centered leadership through change. Before we dive into that topic, though, I'm going to invite us to engage in a bit of an experiential exercise. So important in all the work that we do as we start our workshops, leadership academies, is to really make sure we're all coming into a place where we can engage in the conversation and be open to new experiences and information. knowing that you're all coming from your morning, maybe lunch, maybe a conversation that didn't go as planned. I want to just invite us to take about 30 seconds to just find a little bit of calmness and set an intention for our time together today. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes if you're in a place where you're feeling safe and comfortable to do so. Otherwise, just find a neutral gaze. And for a moment, I just want you to notice your breath. Your breath is coming in through your inhale and out. Now take a moment to notice and tune in a little bit to your body. Maybe being intentional, loosening your jaw muscles, the tension in your forehead. And as you get to your shoulders, opening them up and back, just allowing them to relax. Encouraging you to think about how you feel against a chair, or if you're standing, maybe your feet against the floor or the ground around you. And just take a moment to notice how your body is feeling, or if there's any areas of tension, to just intentionally let that go. Now go ahead and open your eyes if you had them closed. And I'm just going to have you take a pause to just notice what's different. Maybe you notice your body shifting a little bit, changing, softening into that relaxation. Or maybe you're starting to cue in, maybe I do need to grab some water or stand up, or, my shoulders are really tight. I just need to move them around, and do what you need to do in this moment to really take care of yourself. So now that we're all maybe feeling a bit more centered and grounded, we're going to continue on today's conversation, this idea of how we maintain a positive workplace climate amidst change, whether that's maybe team changes, a reduction in force, maybe you're stepping into new responsibilities as a leader. Again, that change is constant, but we want to be mindful of how that change could be disruptive, and or ways that we could actively support that in being a positive thing, how we can promote this idea of engagement, keeping morale low, keeping communication online, and how we as leaders can really foster some of that sense of resilience and adaptability with the teams that we support. And today's topic came from a great question we had from a member of our audience a few sessions ago. And this idea of, it's great that we can think about how we maintain and really enhance workplace climate when things are going well, but as we're facing different challenges or in periods of transition, how we can be mindful or more intentional during that process. So the question that came in was, at my company, we're at a point of transition after reduction in force. How can I help myself and my team in the messy middle? And I loved the use of the term messy middle, because often we hear, right, something's happening, here was the outcome, but we leave out the important part of the conversation, which is, how do we really navigate through that middle and sometimes chaos, resistance, challenge? And so we really wanted to open up the conversation today around that topic. And again, as you're joining and have questions for us, clarification, maybe shared experience, feel free to drop that into the chat. But first, I thought it would be important, and Megan, I'm going to ask for your insights around, what are some of the common challenges teams face during periods of significant change or transition? Based on the work that you do, what do you see and notice?
Yeah, that's it's helpful to start at the beginning here in terms of what is it that creates that messy middle. And I agree, I love that term because it is helping us recognize that there in
Well,
between when something changes and when they're in our experience. I think the things that the environment that you're in or the work that you do. Are you guys hearing me okay?
We are now. I think you
Okay.
froze just briefly.
Okay, I'm back. Um, there's another challenge that we face. But some of the common challenges that we have seen, I think stem in large part from kind of the understanding of what is at play when there is transition, when there is a reduction in force, when there is a reorganization or some sort of change in staff or leadership. And what all of those have in common is that they create an environment of uncertainty. And they can create an environment of a sense of instability. And as humans, many of us, if not most of us, crave certainty. And we crave the ability to have some sense of influence or autonomy over our worlds. And during times of change, those two things tend to kind of feel like, if not actually are, kind of thrown out the window. So I think the things that we commonly see are a variety of different forms of resistance, whether that comes in the form of just not changing behavior or asking difficult questions, or being unwilling to really understand or make the change. We can see any number of communication breakdowns, especially when there are shifts in roles and responsibilities that are a part of that change. So, maybe I'm reporting to somebody new, but when does that happen? And do I still get to have contact with my previous supervisor? There's so many questions that come up. And so resistance to change, breakdowns in communication, and related to that, I think are questions around role and responsibility clarity. And so those three things, I think, are those that we see pretty frequently from any employee in an organization. And there can certainly be any number of leadership challenges that are a part of changing environments as well.
And I appreciate you giving so many examples of behaviorally what that might look like, Megan, because sometimes I think as leaders, we might see these things and think, oh, this is just my team. But we see this broadly, right? Across the board as we think about some of these social needs or even desires, right? This idea of certainty being primary to that in the workplace. And when we don't have information, either we're seeking that out, asking it, or we might be creating that information ourselves. With that, you've talked about just some of where breakdown in communication or even connection can be impacted. What does that ultimately impact? What do you notice that from maybe a team standpoint?
That breakdown in communication and connection. I think when that happens, what we notice is a lack of alignment. And so there's any number of ways that misunderstandings, misinterpretation, assumptions can come into play in terms of what someone is doing or is not doing, what they're communicating, why they're communicating it, and that just kind of that sense of predictability shifts away, and that can get people out of alignment. So, the sense that we feel like we're on the same page, rowing in the same direction, that sense that we have a clear goal or vision for our team or the work that our team is doing. Some of those things that employees really kind of hang their hat on as those North Stars, those can get all jumbled up in communication and connection disruptions, and get us out of alignment.
And with that, we're talking about a lot to kind of behaviorally and cognitively, thinking about these concepts. Donnie, I'm curious from your perspective, as we think about the emotional element of that, right? How we feel as we navigate through change.
Yeah, I think Megan mentioned the concept of uncertainty, and I think when we experience uncertainty in the midst of change, there becomes this ambiguous threat. We're not sure exactly what this change is going to mean for us. It might bring up questions around financial security or role transition. Will I like my new or work well with my new boss or my new supervisor? And when that happens, I think the focus shifts to safety and security. And so there is a reduction in employee productivity because there is energy and focus being expanded toward this idea of change and what that might mean for us. And then you have the actual implementation of the change, which can draw away from productivity. And so it can really bring up a lot of different emotions for folks. A lot of times we see anxiety, a lot of times we see anger, frustration. People who are really quick to say, well, I'm not going through this, I'm going to leave instead, or they withdraw silently. But all driven by a lot of those internal emotions that are coming up essentially around this ambiguous threat, this trying to deal with, and everybody deals with it differently, but trying to deal with, what do I need to do to feel the safest right now? And that can bring forward a lot of really strong feelings.
Absolutely. And it comes back to even, Megan, what you were talking about, this idea of resistance, right? Sometimes we might interpret that in different ways. But Donnie, as you're describing, it's almost, yeah, kind of that threat of safety and security. What do I need to do to protect myself amongst this change? And that can burn a lot of energy that then maybe detracts us from the other work that needs to happen. Megan, I'm wondering if you could expand a bit more on just what resistance may look like, or maybe even sensitivity to change on the team. And yeah, how that can really manifest.
Yeah, this is kind of the culmination of a lot of things we've already talked about, because for a lot of people, resistance comes from a feeling, not a cognitive response to information that we do or we don't have. It comes from that feeling of, am I sure? What do I know? What is unclear? What's not known? How is this going to impact me? And so I think when we consider the presence of resistance and how we might navigate that within our teams, whether we're a team lead and we're trying to support our colleagues, or whether we're a supervisor supporting those that report to us, oftentimes in change environments, we try to meet resistance with logic. And I think that's one of the big mismatches in change management situations, is that if we are feeling scared or uncertain or frustrated, and what we're met with is, yeah, but here's our 20-point plan for how that's not helping. That's not meeting the need. And so it sounds simple, but what can be really effective in terms of trying to understand and manage resistance is to get curious and to try to acknowledge the emotion, understand where the resistance is coming from, and be patient with that.
And I think it's also important, Megan, you're highlighting this idea of perspective. You know, as the leader, I might have been aware of some of these changes or active in creating this change plan. This is the first time my team members are hearing about this.
Right.
And so emotionally, I've maybe had a chance to kind of process and game plan where this is all very new information to those individuals. That also highlights really the role of a leader through some of this. And so, Donnie, I'd be curious, as you think about, you know, how leaders might be able to model this idea of maybe resilience or an attitude that's going to be supportive of a change, or helping to show how we can maybe shift our energy differently.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the challenges is that leaders are not immune to the impacts of change as well. And so not only do they have to rally the teams and the people who are working for them, but they also have to manage their own fears and concerns around uncertainty and those ambiguous threats as well. So I think I really like what, Megan, what you said around curiosity. checking in, keeping those lines of communication open. How are people doing? Rather than steamrolling people with this logic of why the change is good. That doesn't play out well, and can even cause more resistance because people feel invalidated or unseen. And so curiosity is one, but also authenticity. You know, if someone is speaking to us and they're saying one thing, but their behaviors or their energy is saying something else, we default to their behaviors and their energy. We read into their nonverbals and we go with that rather than, you know, taking on what they're saying. And so I think that transparency and the authenticity piece can be really critical here too. Just say, you know what, I know this is really hard, you know, and just being real and open with people so that you can kind of make that connection. And anywhere that you have the opportunity to connect with folks who are feeling a little anxious or upset about the change or struggling with it at all, or even before that happens, you know, laying that foundation of connection of, we're going to be changing. It might be challenging. There will be challenges, but this is why we're doing it. And coming back to the why after you acknowledge and validate, I think can be really effective.
Yeah, that curiosity can go a long way. And like you were saying, continuing to articulate the why, and not just why this benefits the organization or us as a team, but to think about, well, what's in it for them? If we go back to some of that safety and security, you know, how can we frame it or get some of that messaging across of how it may benefit them? Or to your point, Donnie, how can we just really validate their experience through the change process? Megan, other things that come to mind in terms of maybe support systems or strategies that leaders can put into place as they're helping their team navigate through that change?
Yeah, this is a case of, it's almost like delegating, where people discover that it would be super beneficial if they were able to delegate when they're like so busy that they don't have time to delegate. So I think one strategy, one system that's really helpful to consider having in place is just kind of proactive check-ins with the team on how are we doing from a climate perspective, so that it's not just something that gets added on during an already kind of busy phase with navigating a change. And that can look like a lot of different ways, but one thing that the Lumen Group does is, well, we can work with a team using our Illuminated climate survey, which is just a short behaviorally based tool that helps people in the team and leaders of the team really understand where are we at in terms of climate? What are the kinds of behaviors that are supporting a positive and connected climate? And is there anything detracting from that? And so if we have that knowledge, then we can kind of check in over time. And in those times of change, we'll be able to really pinpoint what are the things that are stable and enduring, and what are the specific things that have become disrupted as a result of this change. And so we can target where we're providing support. And that also is a form of keeping those lines of communication open, like Donnie said. But sometimes when people are asked a question by their supervisor, you know, how are things going? They might not know how to answer or feel comfortable answering. And so having a tool that allows people to just, you know, yes, no, strongly agree, strongly do, however they're able to communicate that, it's a way of them being able to provide information in a format that's comfortable. And it's an expression on the part of leadership that they care and they're paying attention.
And I like that idea of having it built into maybe a regular cadence of already open communication. Or if that's not the case, right, being able to facilitate, get people to a place where they can engage in that type of a survey in a really, you know, an honest and open way that can provide some points around, well, how do we make some changes to make some real difference? You know, as we get ready to wind down the conversation, you know, as you reflect on maybe some of the teams and leaders you've supported through periods of change, other important lessons learned or maybe imparting wisdom to share, especially for those leaders who are navigating change presently?
Yeah, I had a couple thoughts. One is, Emily, you spoke to it earlier. A lot of times leadership knows about a change quite a while before everyone else finds out about it. And so trying to find a way to kind of bridge that gap so that we're introducing at the appropriate time, in a way that can start to build some interest and some curiosity, rather than coming in and saying, hey, we're doing this thing and we're starting tomorrow, and here are all the reasons, right? As soon as you say starting tomorrow, everybody goes offline, right? Nobody's listening to, oh yeah, let's hear the reasons. But the other thing is too, so there's timing. If you do it too early and then nothing really happens, or if there isn't, the change initiative isn't put into play right away, people kind of lose interest, and they can lose some trust, I think, in the process, and ultimately potentially in the leadership. And so I think timing and execution are really critical, and that's going to look different for every organization. I think those are two pieces that I've seen kind of have a really negative impact or detrimental impact on a change.
Yeah. And I know we're really tight on time, but I would just add something that has stuck with me from Brene Brown is this idea of vulnerability with boundaries. And so it's, as a leader during times of change, I think sometimes leaders can feel like they need to have this, this very like, this is what we're going to do, and this is why we're doing it, and this kind of hard front. But Brene Brown also talks about having a soft front, hard back. So how can you how can you be okay as a leader not knowing? Because during times of change, leaders don't know all the answers either. Sometimes there are a lot of unknown unknowns, and there are known unknowns. And so it can be very helpful for us to be able to be okay opening up space for conversation, knowing we might not have all the answers that people are going to give or are going to ask questions for. And if we can invite that conversation, say, you know what, that's a really good question. I don't know that. When I know, I'll provide an answer. That is a form of giving some certainty. It doesn't have to be the 100% answer. It can be a way of telling people, I hear you. I will work to figure that out. And sometimes that's a really important response.
Well, because I think, Megan, that also opens up that modeling of it's okay to not be okay in those situations, right? And goes back to Donnie's point around, how we can help validate the team through some of this is just by modeling and creating that space where it's, hey, it's okay that we maybe talk about those things as they're happening in real time.
Right.
Well, thank you both so much. And thank you to those of you who have joined us here today. This time always goes really quickly, but to know that today is not the last Illuminated conversation. We have a series coming up in July. There's a little QR code, or there's not on this one, but you can follow us on LinkedIn to register for these upcoming sessions, July 11th and the 25th, as we continue this conversation around workplace stress and really creating resilience and micro strategies that can really help transform a team. Going from the fluffy self-care stuff to the real changes that we can make day to day to have that impact around making sustainable practices, boosting engagement, morale, and ultimately that fulfillment amongst the team. But as always, thank you so much for joining, and please stay in touch with us. You can find us on LinkedIn or our website, where we have more resources, recordings of past Illuminated conversations for you to dive into, and our email as well. We're always open and available to support you in some of the needs of things you're going through. So thanks for joining today, and thank you again, Megan and Donnie, for guiding us through such a great conversation.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks, Emily.